Was geht ab, liebe Leute? Mein Name ist Yannick. Ihr seht das DIFFUS-Magazin. Heute mit einer neuen Ausgabe von DIFFUS THEMA. Ich hatte nämlich das große Vergnügen, mit Evan von Pinegrove zu sprechen. Und wir haben uns das Thema Umweltschutz oder eher das Thema Klimakrise ausgesucht, weil das ein Thema ist, was ihm sehr nah am Herzen liegt und uns allen auch nah am Herzen liegen sollte. Es ging dann im Laufe des Gesprächs um noch einiges mehr. Schaut euch das an. Ich finde, es ist sehr schön geworden. Viel Spaß. Vergesst nicht zu abonnieren und zu folgen und so weiter. Ihr wisst ja Bescheid, wie das hier läuft auf YouTube. Dankeschön.
First of all, when was the first time you were confronted with this topic of the climate change and the climate crisis?
This is something that's been well known by scientists since at least the 1980s. I was born in 1989. It was probably something I was exposed to pretty young. You know, I have parents who are tapped in, who, you know, knew about recycling and taught me the importance of it. In fact, public school, where I went to in Montclair, we learned about recycling. Those were ideas that I was exposed to pretty early, but I think that it wasn't until the weather patterns in the United States started getting a lot more intense that I really started to feel kind of afraid about it. I thought, you know, as recently as 5 years ago, that this might be a situation that our grandchildren have to face. And now I realize that it's something that we have to face and that we can't kick the can down the road, that it's now or never.
What made you think about how you as an individual contribute to the climate change?
Well, so I think one major shift for me was realizing that although I do have an impact, really it's about 10 companies that are making the majority of emissions, including the American military. This needs to be addressed with courage from a policy standpoint. And I think companies like BP have done their best to make us believe that it's our problem as consumers. But the fact is, all of these companies are turning out plastic. What choice do we? It's so hard as a consumer to try to avoid these things, though we should try. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but I think that if we're really going to have a serious conversation about the climate crisis, we need to talk about American imperialism. We need to talk about a much smaller budget on the military, because for better, but mostly for worse, the American culture and American political decisions have an enormous impact on geopolitics. But there are certain things like, you know, turning out the light when you're not in the room. You know, that was again ingrained from an early age, and
turn off heating, for example.
Yeah, totally. That we should not be wasteful, that we should be conscientious citizens of the world. And part of that means not using more than we need.
Oh, yeah. Also with the things you eat, for example, like meat and all of that.
I have endless compassion for anybody who's having a hard time moving away from a diet that includes animal products. But if you can, you should try to eat conscientiously. Local, you know, like, oh man, I love avocados, but they don't grow near me. I'm trying to cut them out. It's, again, just so hard as a consumer. Like, if you really do research, you learn that, like, you know, there's all this palm oil in vegan products, like it's like butters and stuff, and that's just like made under super exploitative conditions in Central America. So it's tough.
Yeah,
it's
same
tough.
with avocados. And
yeah, right.
I also feel like as a consumer, you have this certain guilt. At least I have this feeling of guilt when I eat meat or when I eat avocados, for example, or almonds or whatever. Yeah. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, there's guilt. There is guilt. But I think it's just really important to kind of repeat to yourself, almost as a mantra, that like they want us to think it's our fault. But it's their fault. You know, BP coined the term carbon footprint as a PR attempt to slough off the blame onto the consumer.
Which is crazy when you think about it, right?
It's crazy.
Of all companies.
You know, ExxonMobil, like, you know, all of these companies knew the science behind it and were deliberately trying to murky the waters about whose responsibility it is. Mm-hmm. But I still feel guilt because it was effective. It was an effective campaign. I mean, it's so horrible, but it worked. And, you know, I think even a lot of people still don't know that carbon footprint was made up by BP.
Mm-hmm. Well, now you know.
Now you know.
How do you stay hopeful, even though that now the science and all the talk and all the debate revolving around it shows us that we're past certain breaking points? How do you stay hopeful in you know?
Yeah. Well, it's important to say that just because we can't do everything doesn't mean we shouldn't do anything. Mm-hmm. And I think that there is increased awareness that this is a problem that we need to solve now. One big issue is that we've got all these septuagenarians in office who don't really care that that shit is going to be terrible in 40 years because they're not going to be around. So that's a huge obstacle. But like, I think that people of roughly our age are like very much on board with the idea that we need to shift our economy pretty drastically. And while we're at it, why don't we, make universal healthcare in the United States? Because we know that there are going to be a lot of medical issues that emerge as a result of climate change. One of the most heartbreaking aspects about climate change is understanding that the people responsible and the people who are going to feel the impact most severely are two completely different groups. You know, we have the global South, who's been historically extracted and, exploited by the global North. And they're going to get the brunt of it with famine and with flooding and with unbearable temperatures. I mean, drought. I think drought. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. It's heartbreaking.
So just to be clear, you also addressing this topic in your music.
It's in the art. It's in the art. And I hope that people listening to the new album will, maybe it'll be comforting. Maybe they'll feel seen. And maybe it will make you more courageous to be a citizen of the world, mm-hmm. In a way that feels responsible and good.
Speaking of hope, my biggest hope is in the younger generations, because I think, at least in Germany, we have this Fridays for Future movement, which is all mm-hmm. over the world nowadays. That lets my mind rest a little bit more easy, because mm-hmm. I know that the younger generation is way more educated and way more fast and in a way more radical as well, which is a good thing.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, I'm so inspired by the younger generation. I mean, like, protect them at all costs.
Oh yeah.
But I also think that there's something quite sad that it's somehow their responsibility. We need to work together, and we need to build a multi-generational movement, which mm-hmm. is being built.
Oh yeah.
But I think it's really interesting to see that it's being led by kids. I mean, like going to marches this summer, for Black Lives. In solidarity, it was amazing to see that like 70% of these people were Gen Z mm-hmm. there. But, we all find our own path to the issues. And 2020 was radicalizing for a lot of people, myself included. And so, it happened when it happened, and I'm happy that I'm here.
Better late than never, right?
Yeah.
I think that's it for this interview.
Well, that's a good note to land on, because there is some optimism. The kids are all right? But I really hope that the one thing that we can take, if you take away one thing from anybody who's watching this, it's that just because we can't do everything doesn't mean we shouldn't do anything. And it's really time to figure out what that is and make a plan and organize, get involved with something like Extinction Rebellion, or I don't know what socialist organizations are around, but like, you know, international socialism is really keyed into a critique, a really smart critique on extractive capitalism. And I think that we need to be, you know, making decisions based on the planet over profit. So we need to move away from the shareholders model. I think a lot of people agree. So yeah, that's the takeaway. Try to get involved if you can.
Let's hope for the best.
Okay. Thank you, Yannick.
Thanks, man.
What a nice conversation. I appreciate
Thank you. I appreciate you. Thank you so much.